Hi everyone, welcome to Go Local Live at the Rhode Island State House. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for this Thursday afternoon show. It's a busy day here at the State House. I'd like to thank my first guest for coming on, Representative Julie Casimiro.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks for coming back. You've done this before.
I haven't. Thank you for having me again.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to come because legislation was introduced today. Representative Aaron Ruggenberg and co-sponsors put this forth to be able to provide fentanyl strips. Now, this is to be able to detect fentanyl in drugs, which, as we know, is prevalent not just in Rhode Island, but across the country. Talk with us about this legislation and your decision to sign on as a co-sponsor.
Kate, I think it is a great piece of legislation. It basically is going to save lives. Since 2014, there's been a huge spike in opioid deaths. 70% of those deaths can be attributed to fentanyl. So if we can get people to stop using drugs with fentanyl in, we can actually save lives. I believe this piece of legislation can be worked out, I think, in agreement on both sides of the aisle.
Now, is this to enable folks who might be, again, partaking in some sort of substance because they know from friends who have passed due to this fentanyl that they can tell if they don't know where this drug has come from, that there's fentanyl in it?
Exactly. And if we can stop someone from using fentanyl, we need to do it. And it's a very inexpensive way of doing it. And, you know, people's like, well, you're enabling drug addicts. No, we're saving lives. And if we can save a life, a fentanyl strip, it costs about $1. If we can save a life, and it's completely worth it.
So talk about a little bit the nuts and bolts. You know, where can folks, if this legislation were to be approved, what's the thought about the rollout?
It'd be with organizations like Anchor Recovery, who might be wanting to help. Anyone who's addressing addiction, and you know, it's getting to people as they're starting the recovery process, or even during the recovery process, because relapsing happens at a moment's notice.
So had the big kickoff today. We'll have more information about that legislation. Again, this is for fentanyl strips. Do you know, has this been done in other states?
It has been done in other states. I couldn't name them off the top of my head, but I think it's a really good legislation. And I think across both aisles we can get it done.
Well, having you here, I know there's other legislation you want to talk about pertaining to some maritime activity.
Yes, there is. My Marine Task Force bill. I introduced this bill last year, but because of its car tax, it really didn't go anywhere. I hope it's going somewhere this year. Basically, it gives a small amount of financial relief to those coastal communities who are protecting Narragansett Bay. Not all coastal communities protect Narragansett Bay. Some do it at different levels. Let's give them just a little bit of relief for training, the cost of training, the fuel involved in training, and a small amount of money to have a huge impact on these municipalities. So I'm hoping it's going to go through this year.
Okay, more legislation to look for from Representative Julie Casimiro. But again, the fentanyl strip legislation introduced today. I appreciate your taking the time to come here and talk with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we'll let you go, and we'll be right back with our next guest here at the State House.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Rhode Island State House. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. I'd like to welcome in my next guest. He's been in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center, first time as a guest here at the State House, because there's legislation today that he'd like to discuss. Paul Roselli, Democratic candidate for governor. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. So the Energy Facilities Siting Board Siting Act Study Commission took place from January till a couple of months ago, and from that study commission came a piece of legislation that we hope will be considered today. So a week ago, they had a public hearing. That hearing was very successful. And now it's before the committee to consider, and we're hoping they're going to approve it.
So talk with us about the nuts and bolts. What are the improvements?
So here's the essence of the bill. And there's been a lot of talk about whether this bill will stop the power plant proposed in the northwest corner of Rhode Island. It'll have something to do with gas infrastructure and wires and all this. Here's what it does. Number one, and this is the big one, it brings Rhode Island up to date.
Okay.
Right now, we're about 31 years behind the curve. Everyone else, all the other New England states have updated their siting and their permitting legislation. Rhode Island has not. Rhode Island is still stuck with the original legislation, the original authority, which took place way back in 1986. The second one it does, it increases the board, it increases the Energy Facility Siting Board from 3 members to 9 members. This adds a whole bunch of other things attached to it. That transparency makes subcommittees available so more people can get involved. It also provides for a public advocate, someone who would advocate for the host community and public within that host community. And third, and this is probably one of the key features of this current legislation, it's going to pay individuals who can ill afford to be on boards and commissions. And that's really important because oftentimes these boards and commissions have people on them that are already paid, attorneys, people from nonprofits or profit agencies, or already in state governments. Rarely, if ever, are there commission members that are from the general public. And one of the reasons that they're not, look, I mean, the boards meet around 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. There's very little transportation. There's no daycare here. There's very little amenities for anyone from the general public who's usually working at that time.
Yes.
So one of the provisions of this particular legislation is to pay these people for sitting on some of these boards and commissions. So those 3 things brings us up to speed, modernizes it, makes it more transparent, and gets a greater number of individuals from a different bunch of communities.
So what are you hearing from folks on these pieces of legislation? Is there any contention?
Yeah, so National Grid and the unions are against it for what I think are the very wrong reasons. They say it's going to inhibit growth, it'll make the process more cumbersome, it'll add to the cost of doing business in Rhode Island. Look, but let's be totally clear and honest here. Every New England state is doing this. Connecticut, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, Massachusetts, they all have many people on board. There's a greater number of people on the boards. There's a greater number of subcommittees, a lot more transparency. And this particular legislation is modeled after the one in New Hampshire. And that's key, too. Actually, it's modeled after the one in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and the state of Washington. That's where this legislation comes from. So it's a good piece of legislation. And for National Grid or the unions to come on and say that it's going to stifle growth and make the process more cumbersome just doesn't work. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's where we are.
So in essence, have you just given us your testimony?
Well, I gave my testimony about a week ago, and that's exactly what I said, in a very stronger way, by the way. But I think this time around, we're guessing there'll be a sub-A. The sub-A will be introduced. There won't be any public hearing. And then we hope, cross your fingers, that at the very least it'll get out of that committee, go to the House floor. We're expecting the House floor to vote it in. On the Senate side, as of right this second, there's no corresponding legislation. So there's no companion bill on the Senate side. That's a little disappointing. But at least on the House side, looks like we're going to get a bill.
So running for governor, we see you often up here at the State House advocating for legislation. Sure. What else is on your plate before the end of the session? Sure.
So there's one thing that'll also be heard today called a forest deforestation bill. This particular bill creates kind of fills a gap of an unintended consequence. The unintended consequence, if you look at your electric bill and you look on the front side and you go, oh my God, there's the bill. And then you turn it over and this is what you're paying. If you look on the second side, you'll see something in big bold letters that say, with the letters REG. That's the Renewable Energy Growth Program. Every bill is about 22 cents. So every ratepayer is paying about 22 cents into the program. And you start to wonder, where does that money go and what is it? That's to pay for renewable energy. That's to get these renewable energy projects off the ground, give them some incentives. The unintended consequence of those is that these big firms, these big solar farms, are using that money to buy big swaths of land, clear-cut forests, and put these solar farms up in places where they probably shouldn't be. Places like Coventry and North Kingstown, Weston, Cranston, big, huge areas of forest, sometimes 50, sometimes 200 acres of land. That's an enormous impact on our state's forest. We don't have that much forest. So in a way, the ratepayers are paying for that clear cutting. What this resolution bill will hopefully fix is that unintended consequence. Take that incentive away for deforestation. The money will still be there, and hopefully we'll funnel that money into where these projects should go, like landfills, capped areas, brownfields, rooftops, parking lots, and not only pay for the installation, but the engineering in some of these places. So that's what this bill is. That's what I, as a candidate for governor, are trying to get passed as well.
So you just answered my next question about, you talk about the deforestation and then the available tracts of land. So in your estimation, why do the solar companies say then that there isn't enough open space and that they need to do the deforestation?
Yeah. So as of right now, pretty much Rhode Island is maxed out in terms of its development. Just about every place you can think of
For solar.
is for everything, for both residential and for solar, and wind as well.
Okay.
And the reason is there are large tracts of land owned by private landowners. These can range anywhere from 10 acres to over 400 or 500 acres. So what's happening is that these folks are looking for, and rightfully so, they're looking for some money, and it's a lot cheaper. It's a lot cheaper to clear cut than it is to put these solar farms on some of these other areas. What we're hoping with this legislation is that we'll move some of that money into away from clear cutting and move that money into having more incentives, more money available that would then make it impossible to do clear cutting and make it more business friendly to do these solar farms on some of these other areas. Yeah, so that's where we're at.
Okay.
And I think what's really important here is that it was an unintended consequence. Some of these energy programs have been around for 20 years, and we never realized, not once, 20 years ago, that we would be at the stage where we're actually paying for clear cutting of forests. But here we are. And it's time to fix it.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to come on and give us a little bit of an insight into what you're going to be advocating for today at the State House. Paul Roselli, thank you for your time.
You bet.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with our next guest here live at the Rhode Island State House. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Rhode Island State House. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. I'd like to welcome my next guest here, Sarah Reeves. Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate your joining us to talk a little bit, and it's super loud here, so I'll have you pipe up a little bit, about the hair braider legislation. It's on the Senate side today, and you've got a unique perspective. You've got a cosmetology degree. You do hair braiding, but you also know of young folks trying to get into the industry, and you have a perspective on it. So please tell viewers about what you'll be telling them today.
Actually, yesterday was speak out to advocate for a lot of new, like teenager girls that are coming on because I'm a mother of 7 or 6 girls. But I don't think this is fair for people to go to school to learn how to braid hair because I have my girls that want to do braiding. They don't have to go to school to be able to braid hair because braiding has been around for the past century. So I think being a cosmetologist, they should give people the freedom, the opportunity, equal opportunity to be able to learn how to. So what they are passion for to go for, let it go for it, let it break it without them making them to take loan to go to cosmetologist school that they cannot afford to pay back.
So tell viewers, Sarah, how much did you spend for a cosmetology degree?
I think my total loan is between 17 to 18,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are you primarily focused just on hair braiding?
Oh, I love my braiding. I really love it because braiding, I see that the more I braid, it got me connected to a lot of culture, know a lot of people. So braiding is fantastic. It is really good. I think for everyone, once you try it, you're going to like it.
Well, we've had folks on about the hair braider freedom legislation here. We do know it's on the Senate side today. I wanted to get Sarah here, who's going to be testifying on behalf of hair braiders for this hair braider freedom legislation. Sarah, I appreciate you taking the time to stop by today.
Yes, you're welcome.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with the latest here at the State House. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Rhode Island State House for GoLocal Live. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. I'd like to welcome Speaker of the House, Nicholas Mattiello.
Kate, always nice to see you.
Appreciate your taking the time to come down here today to give us an update on the May revenue estimating numbers, and we have some updates for you. The revenues are $130 million ahead over projections. Now, this is for FY18, $75 million ahead, FY19, $59 million ahead. Break it down for us. What are your thoughts about hearing these numbers?
Well, I'm certainly pleased. It certainly gives us breathing room, but it's not relief. We're still going to have tough decisions to make. Our revenues look like they're trending upward, so that's good news for the state of Rhode Island. Some of it is transactional capital gains that were held up with the pending tax changes at the federal level. So now those transactions were executed and it creates the tax liability. So some of them are transactional and one time, but our revenues are heading in the right direction. So it's optimistic and generally good news, but we have to be cautious. Not absolute relief, and we'll still have some tough decisions to make.
Now, one of the numbers that we have here, too, is the caseload numbers, 10 million higher. So there's some costs here as well. Yes,
and that's going to be the case throughout different departments. Our cost is going up. Some of the caseloads, DCYF caseloads are up, I believe, and that's appropriate. We're going to take care of our children. Some of our caseloads, I think, may be up because of UHIP. So we're going to have to examine them and take a look, and we'll deal with the caseload. So the news is generally good and generally optimistic, but there are some issues within the conference that we have to continue to look at.
Speaking of kids, you can probably hear some highly spirited young folks behind us here in the State House, a lot going on as well. So you talk about being optimistic, but, there still have to be some hard decision made. There's some items in the budget. Let's talk about the proposed raises, $30 million.
Those are unbudgeted. The raises were given after the budget was proposed. There was no accounting or planning for them. So $30 million is something that we're going to have to address. The governor has the sole authority to negotiate with state employees. She granted the raises, and we're going to have to budget for them. But I will say our hardworking men and women certainly deserve the raises. So I'm pleased that we're in a position to be able to fund the raises that were negotiated.
And one of the things we have seen up here at the State House is the proposed cuts to developmental and behavioral developmental disabilities. How is that going to be addressed?
And we have about $18 million in proposed cuts to the developmentally disabled community. I don't want to speak for everybody, but I'm certainly strongly going to advocate for giving the money back and restoring it. I don't think that's an appropriate place to go for your cuts. And we were always planning on restoring those funds. And excuse me, I think that thinking is pretty universal.
So it's not the revenue estimating numbers. The billion-dollar question now is, when are we going to see a budget?
Now that these numbers are actually in our possession and have been assessed, we're going to be working almost day and night. I want to get a budget as soon as possible. We'll be negotiating with the Senate. We'll be negotiating with the governor. We're going to put out a good budget. I've said we have breathing room, not absolute relief, and we're going to have difficult decisions to make. But I want to assure the citizens of the state of Rhode Island that it will be well balanced and it'll be a very good pro-business budget.
One of the last times we had you on, we talked about the POSOX. Are you still in conversations with ownership? Have there been any updates?
There are no updates. We're in conversations, and I don't have updates. So you read into that whatever you want. If when we get updates and if we make some progress, I'll be happy to report it to you.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to come down here as, again, the May revenue estimating numbers are looking at $130 million over projections. As you said, some breathing room, but still some hard decisions to be made.
Yes, I don't want to create the impression that we have an easy time funding all of the requests that are out there. We're still going to have to closely scrutinize the budget and make difficult decisions. There is still a structural deficit.
Last question while I have you here. Again, you mentioned a little bit about the impact of federal and the Trump tax cuts. Do we think these projections being over and ahead really a result of state policy or a combination of state and implications from the federal government?
It's mostly state. Last year, our revenues were down because people held off on some of their transactions because they anticipated the taxes being reduced at the federal level. So those transactions were now executed, so our revenues are up this year, whereas they were down last year. And we've got some one-time money, about $20 million in each year, that are actually a result of the federal tax cut. So about 40 of that 130 are certainly one-time and a result of the federal tax changes.
Okay, well, I appreciate your coming here to break this down as everyone was waiting to hear, again, these May revenue estimating numbers. Speaker of the House, Mattiello, thank you for your time.
Kate, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back here at the Rhode Island State House for Go Local Live.
All right.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Go Local Live at the Rhode Island State House. I'm here with Michael Rojo with Jobs with Justice. Thank you for joining me today.
Of course.
Had you on before, wanted you on today specifically on a subject matter Go Local has been reporting on extensively. This pertains to the developer Brady Sullivan here in Rhode Island. Go Local's big story today was looking at new allegations facing the developer, including the fire marshal investigating Harris Mill loss. We've heard from a doctor about seeing patients and his call to the Department of Health to take action. You've clearly been following Brady Sullivan.
Yeah.
And also the need for oversight. You've got the workers' perspective,
Right.
especially when they're there. So what are your thoughts as to where we are with the state, with mega developers who might be getting historic tax credits, and what needs to be done?
So Brady Sullivan's backstory really is a pretty grim story. You guys know it. You're some of the first to report on it. They have a record of environmental damage and violating workplace safety. This is tough. So honestly, the historic tax credit has a lot of use, and it's a valuable tool, but it's only good if it's actually serving the people in Rhode Island. Right now, developers use it as a way to get around labor law and environmental regulation. So there needs to be some oversight and accountability attached to it, and possibly lockout language or something to make it better.
So basically a need to address the structure of historic tax credits and specifically oversight.
Right. It's almost all oversight enforcement. So it's not linked right now. So if I find, for example, the rubber mill where they're blowing lead dust into the air openly without any shielding whatsoever, we could get them to shut down that aspect, but we couldn't get them to shut down the job. And there needs to be like a top-down looking at what they're doing.
So what do you hear from the workers? That's your perspective of, again, folks on the job. So what are they telling you?
So the conditions are unsafe. They're never given proper personal protection equipment or the training to use it. The subcontractors are always the lowest bidder, and they often change hands before people are able to actually collect their money and get paid on time. They also have a history of misclassification, of telling people they're being subcontractors when they're not really subcontractors.
Well, we had some back and forth this morning after the article was published. Again, your call for more oversight for both developers and specifically as it pertains to who's getting money through the historic tax credit program. But I caught you here at the State House because you've got some, I'm sure, activity here today. What is it you've got?
No, I was visiting, honestly.
Keeping tabs on the powers
Keeping
that
tabs.
be.
Well, no, there's the driver's license bill is going to be heard next Tuesday.
Okay.
So I was talking to some folks about that and wanted to make sure we had people who are going to come out for that.
So you're getting that set up. Do you expect a lot of folks to turn out for it?
Yes, I do.
Okay. I'm glad you could come here to talk about Brady Sullivan. I'm sure we'll be talking about driver's licenses.
I'm sure you will.
Mike Rojo with Jobs with Justice, I appreciate your taking the time today.
Anytime.
We'll have more for you on the new revenue estimating numbers that just came out. We just spoke with the Speaker of the House, so be sure to tune in to Go Local. But for us today, here at the State House, Mike wraps it up for Go Local Live here at the Rhode Island State House. I'm Go Local News Editor Kate Nagel. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Rhode Island State House. I'm Go Local News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for watching this Thursday afternoon. Lots going on up here. Heard from Speaker of the House, Nicholas Mattiello. The numbers just coming out from May Revenue Estimating Conference, $130 million ahead of projections. Now, he said, optimistic, but provides only some relief in that there's going to still have to be hard decisions made. Broke down those numbers, including an additional $10 million in caseload, so costs there as well. We had Julie Casimiro, representative, talking about legislation introduced to provide fentanyl strips throughout the state. Now, this is to detect the presence of fentanyl in drugs, which she pointed out has been part of so many overdoses as part of the opioid epidemic and more. She talked about that piece of legislation. Mike Rojo talking about Brady Sullivan with Jobs with Justice, and Paul Roselli, a Democratic candidate for governor, here today. Energy Siting Facility Act, they're looking at making some changes to that. He broke down what he sees as necessary moving forward. So I appreciate everyone who's coming on Go Local Live here. Everyone is watching. We'll have more for you tomorrow on Live, but plenty more on GoLocalProv.com and Facebook. I'm Go Local News Editor Kate Nagel.